Ethel Fugard is a well-known South African playwright and author, and he incidentally received an honorary doctorate from Stellenbosch University at the same graduation ceremony where a doctorate was also conferred on Professor Herbert Ernst Wiegand. In his plays, Ethel Fugard tried to express his opposition against the previous political regime in South Africa. And he did that in a number of ways, and his weapon was actually his plays. And in one of the plays that he wrote, My Children, My Africa, a play set against the protest and the violence during the 80s in South Africa, there was a teacher, Mr. M, and his student, Naomi, and the two of them were talking alone in the classroom, and the teacher was trying to convince the student that violence is not a solution to the problems. And while they were talking, there were unrest outside the classroom. A stone was thrown through the window. So this teacher picked the stone up, and he held the stone in one hand. And he picked his dictionary up and held that in the other hand. And he said to his student, if you put these two on a scale, you will find that they weigh more or less the same. In this hand, I have the whole English language. In this hand, I have a single word. The best known people in the world manage to open the floodgates of their ecstasy, their problems, and their joy with the words in this little book. I want you to have it. As lexicographers, we are presenting society with dictionaries. But what do we put into these dictionaries? What do they carry? Are they impartial and objective carriers of meaning? Are they instruments towards bias and a specific ideology? Are they perhaps even more dangerous than a stone? Do they open the floodgates of ecstasy or of despair? Do they promote inclusion or exclusion? These are questions that lexicographers need to answer, and I will respond to some of them by looking at a few aspects regarding the fact that language has a social impact, that dictionaries reflect language of a given speech community, and then I'll look at some aspects of the language and dictionary situation in South Africa, with a focus on othering and exclusion, but also a focus on restoration and inclusion. We all know that language influences human behavior, and it can function as an agent of inclusion and exclusion. It also has ideological power and reflects something of its society. And the social impact of language is connected to its diversity, to its products, and its processes. Language defines and largely constitutes our existence, and this language is reflected in our dictionaries. Dictionaries become social agents, and within a post-anthropocentric ethics, language and by extension dictionaries should negotiate human culture within a flat ontology where everything is relational and contextual. Looking at Afrikaans, due to its Dutch-European origins, and the fact that Afrikaans is spoken by many white South Africans, the fact that it was the primary language of the then National Party that came to power in 1948 and formally introduced many aspects of the apartheid system, Afrikaans had often been stigmatized as the language of oppression. And this stigmatization was done in spite of the fact that more than 50% of the mother tongue speakers of Afrikaans are not white South Africans. But color has always been a sensitive issue in South Africa. And when language and color are associated, language then also becomes sensitive, and it becomes a political instrument. And that was the case with Afrikaans. The politicization of Afrikaans reached a climax in 1976. There were a number of excluding procedures. For instance, there was a situation where the forced use of Afrikaans alongside English in the schools was brought to the fore in a very aggressive way. Also in schools where the majority of students were mother tongue speakers of the indigenous South African languages. This led to violent student protests and riots that aggravated on June the 16th in 1976 when the police shot and killed a young boy, Hector Peterson, in Soweto. And this was a turning point in the long walk to inclusion in South Africa. Prior to 1994, South Africa had two official languages, Afrikaans and English. Since 1994, we have 11 official languages. The Nguni languages, Zulu, isiXhosa, Swati, and isiNdebele. The Sotho languages, Sepedi, Sesotho, and Setswana, as well as Venda and Tsonga. But what about the lexicography in Africa? In Africa, the early dictionaries were not compiled for the use by Africans, but rather to assist European explorers, colonial administrators, and missionaries in their learning of the languages. For a very long time, African lexicography was dominated by a Euro-centered approach, with dictionaries primarily compiled for the benefit of European visitors to this country. This form of exclusion was only countered by a transition to an Afro-centered approach in the later decades. This paved the way for the emergence of African dictionaries by African lexicographers. The emergence of the so-called New South Africa in 1994 led to the indigenous languages elevated to official languages and inclusion in the formal system of the country. Shortly after 1994, the Pan-South African Language Board, abbreviated as PANSOP, was founded. And this was a state-funded body, and it had to put the multilingual model into practice, which was not that easy. The establishment of a national lexicography unit, so-called NLU, for each one of the official South African languages was one of the early breakthroughs of the Pan-South African Language Board. And these NLUs were responsible for the planning and compilation of dictionaries of their specific language. But they did not start on an equal playing field. Prior to 1994, the Comprehensive Afrikaans Dictionary, the Wörterbuch van die Afrikaanse taal, the Dictionary of the Afrikaans language, was started in 1926. And since the very beginning, it had partial and later full financial support from the state. And as a result, this dictionary developed in a very, very good way. And as a functional and a productive unit, this NLU of Afrikaans produced the dictionary and a high level of lexicographic sophistication along with it. This was a form of structural inclusion. Looking at the other languages, work on the Dictionary of South African English also received some state funding, but as a smaller project, not as much as the WAT. The Greater Dictionary of isiXhosa and the Zulu Dictionary Isatsamusu received very limited state funding. That was prior to 1994. So lexicography in the other languages was excluded from financial support from the state. This was an uneven playing field that benefited some languages, especially Afrikaans and English, but excluded the majority of indigenous languages that represented by far the largest speech communities. Dictionaries have linguistic expressions as their treatment units, and the treatment provided is primarily of a linguistic nature. But a dictionary should not be regarded as commenting only on linguistic issues. As an agent in social impact, it also reflects the culture of a specific community, the attitudes and assessment of the lexicographer and the broader speech community towards their world and the prevailing ideologies and different ways of thinking. The default approach when deciding on the genuine purpose of a dictionary should be an unbiased and objective selection, presentation, and treatment of linguistic expressions. This ideal, unfortunately, is not always accomplished, due to lexicographers explicitly employing their dictionaries as instruments to execute certain material forces. This can result in different forms of lexicographic exclusion regarding, for example, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and so on and so forth. Insult and offense by means of othering occurred in Afrikaans and other South African dictionaries and caused justified unhappiness and disparage. The words and expressions that inflict the most insult and offense are those referring to the different races in a derogatory way. Some of these words have always had a negative connotation, but were not always used to deliberately offend someone else. However, changes in South African politics resulted in an increase in the derogatory value of these items and the extent of the inclusion resulting from their use. Dictionaries are loaded weapons and can be devastating tools in offending, insulting, and disparaging people. Exclusion by means of othering is one of the typical problems encountered in a biased dictionary. Steve Kaplan defines the notion of othering as follows. He says it's the classification of people as superior or inferior based on dogmatically categorizing them as part of an in-group or out-group. The discriminators consider themselves to belong to the superior, dominant, similar in-group, while the others are relegated to the inferior, subordinate, different out-group. The othering may have deleterious consequences, such as exclusion and violence, and serves to justify the intolerance and oppression of others, since to them they are lesser beings, those victimized by othering are others. Against this background, I will now focus on some aspects of the lexicographic treatment of one of these sensitive terms, and undoubtedly the most insulting and offending of all racist terms, formerly used to refer to black people in South Africa, the word kafir. Today, this word, the use of this word, is punishable by law in South Africa. And in South Africa, people often use the expression the K word to avoid the use of this offensive word. And at this stage, I must put in a disclaimer by saying that I acknowledge the offensive and insulting value of this word, and I explicitly distance myself from its use. This word has not only occurred in Afrikaans dictionaries, but also in English dictionaries. One of the first South African English dictionaries, Afrikanerisms by Petman in 1913, indicates the Arabic origin of this word, where it means an infidel, an unbeliever in Islam. And then Petman continues, the Arabs applied this word to the Negroes of the interior. From them it was adopted by the early Portuguese navigators. Our countrymen in turn taking it over from them and subsequently applying it especially to the Bantu tribes of Southeast Africa. The term is entirely unknown in the language of the people to whom it thus specifically applied, and I've known it to be vigorously repudiated by them as a national designation. Interesting in this comment is not only Petman's awareness of the derogatory nature of this word, but also the statement that this word is not known in the language of the people referred to by this word. This is exclusion to the extreme, insulting people by using an offensive foreign language word to designate them. And in this regard, this dictionary informed the users and the readers of this situation. Looking at the Big Afrikaans Dictionary, as a comprehensive dictionary, the assignment of the WAT is to present a comprehensive macrostructural coverage with as many items as possible from the lexicon of Afrikaans included as lemata. Work on this dictionary commenced in 1926 and they're still going on. Volume number 16 was published last year. And although the WAT has 16 volumes, it remains a single dictionary and should be assessed as such. The editorial approach followed in 1926 differed completely from what currently applies, And it's predictable that there would be quite a number of differences and inconsistencies in the different volumes. This also applies to the way in which sensitive words and expressions have been treated in this dictionary. The infamous K-word was included and treated in volume 5 that was published in 1968. This lemma in that dictionary had neither a label nor did its article contain another marker to link this item to its offensive use in the dictionary external world. The core of the paraphrase of meaning of the derogatory sense is as follows. General designation for a member of the Bantu race in South Africa. Due to the unfavorable values that it often has, it is often also in compounds replaced by natural, native, or currently preferably by Bantu. Two aspects need to be mentioned here. Firstly, the dictionary indicates that this word has an unfavorable value, but it makes no mention of the offense and the insult caused by the use of this word. This was 1968. By saying that the word is the general designation, the implication is that the dictionary confirms and even condones the use of this word, and therefore also the resulting othering and exclusion. A second aspect regards the words indicated as substitutes for the K-word. As also seen in the treatment in some other dictionaries, lexicographers were aware of the negative value of this word. Within the Afrikaans and English speech communities, the use of alternative words like natural and its English equivalent native was introduced to reduce the insulting impact. But these words merely carried the same burden as the K-word previously carried. Although they were less offensive, their use was often regarded as a slightly more concealed form of othering. The stigmatization of blacks in South Africa by the respected forms of designation also had influence on the academic discourse. The words Bantu, English Bantu, were used in an attempt to avoid offense when referring to black South Africans. From a scientific point of view, this word has the word Bantu has a completely neutral meaning. It consists of the prefix ba, which is a plural indicating prefix, and the stem tu, which means human being. So Bantu literally means people. But it is also the scientific designation of the language family to which most of the indigenous South African languages belong. But the negative connotation that this word carried as a substitute for the K-word resulted in this word becoming taboo in the South African environment. And even its use to scientifically designate the language family was seen as insulting. Consequently, the term African languages was introduced to refer to the South African languages that belong to the Bantu family. And former university departments of Bantu languages were renamed as departments of African languages. And we're dealing with a complete misnomer here, but here the language responds to the political situation that we experience. As a comprehensive dictionary, the WAT should not display a purist approach. Sensitive words of all types have to be included. The important decision on the side of the lexicographer is not whether to lemmatize, but how to treat these words. So looking at this dictionary, the mere inclusion of racist words cannot be regarded as promoting linguistic exclusion. The treatment allocated to these words, however, can be seen as a form of severely biased lexicography. The lexicon of Afrikaans contains numerous compounds, also many compounds with the K word as first stem. These compounds that qualify as lemma candidates need to be included, but the users must be made aware of their offensive value. Even the insufficient attempt with regard to the word kafir, due to the unfavorable value that it often has, to make users aware of the offensive value has not been repeated in the articles with the compounds as lemma signs. These articles have no labels, no didactic markers to indicate the unacceptability of the use of this word, and even worse, the paraphrases of meaning often include the K word in the meta-language of the dictionary. One such example is the compound kaffebrak. In Afrikaans, the word brak is an informal word for a dog or a mongrel, a dog of lesser breed. The compound kaffebrak is explained in this dictionary as inferior, badly bred dog, like those that Kaffirs usually keep. By using the offensive word in the paraphrase of meaning, the dictionary condones and perpetuates its use and explicitly contributes to othering and exclusion. In the articles of both the simplex and the compounds, the WAT includes example sentences to illustrate the use of the word, and these example sentences are not labeled, so they go unmarked and they contribute to the whole othering. Fortunately, and now we're at the turning point, I said I would look at exclusion, and now we are moving towards inclusion. So the story does have a happy ending. In the last decades of the previous century, the editors of this dictionary became aware of the fact that their editorial policy had to change. They needed a different approach to the treatment of sensitive items. And this resulted in an international discussion forum hosted by the dictionary in February 1994 to discuss the treatment of insulting and sensitive lexical items in this dictionary. The Bureau of the VAT decided to use this discussion to look at all types of sensitive words and to have a uniform policy that would determine the future selection and especially treatment of these words. The following categories of sensitive words and insulting items were identified: racist terms, sexist terms, items that indicate stigmatized physical or mental conditions, items with a social, political, and religious structure, and then obscene and vulgar lexical items. At this forum, linguists, lexicographers, and meta-lexicographers were invited to participate. And one of the questions that the participants had to answer before the forum was whether these sensitive items need to be included in this specific dictionary. The overwhelming and lexicographically sound response was that they indeed had to be included. The renowned lexicographer Ladislaw Segusta said that omitting these forms from the lemma list would constitute a form of lexicographic myopia. Following intensive and robust discussions, it was decided that in the spirit of reconciliation and impartial and inclusive lexicography, the new policy for the treatment of insulting and sensitive items would be adopted and applied in this dictionary. The decision was that these lexical items would still be included in the dictionary, but an extensive system of labeling would be employed, and the meta-language would be as neutral and sensitive as possible. With regard to racist items, no illustrative material would be given in the printed dictionary. The dictionary, and I'm quoting from their document, does not want to provide any encoding information regarding racist lexical items. Illustrative examples showing recorded language use could indeed contribute to othering and exclusion. So these materials, although not presented in the printed dictionary, are available in the online dictionary and in the database of this dictionary. The user guidelines of each subsequent volume of the dictionary would also contain a section, Policy for the Treatment of Insulting and Sensitive Lexical Items. And since 1994, this has been included in each new volume of the dictionary. And all articles with a sensitive item as lemma sign would include a cross-reference referring the user to this section in the front meta text. This new policy was directed at future volumes of the VAT and has since its inception indeed been implemented in a strict and consistent way. The printed volumes published prior to the new policy could, however, not be changed at this stage. The dictionary embarked on an active revision process to apply the new policy to all articles in the online version of the dictionary. And this dictionary has been fully edited according to the new policy. So the WTAT now displays an unbiased treatment directed at inclusion, and it makes its users aware of the offensive and insulting nature of all sensitive lexical items. This policy has helped to counter exclusion and othering. It has served as a model for other lexicographic projects in South Africa. It has therefore enhanced the quality and objectivity of the broader South African lexicographic environment. As social agents with ideological power, South African dictionaries have taken their turn to matter. It is the task of the lexicographer to devise and implement a policy that can avoid a biased approach in the treatment of sensitive lexical items. Where this is done, the dictionary can contribute to processes of harmonization, and as a practical instrument, it can enhance impartial communication. As lexicographers, we do not have to choose between a stone and a dictionary. We know that we are offering our society a dictionary, but we have to decide what kind of tool we are creating. A dictionary can often cause more pain and devastation than a single stone. Should our dictionary be exclusive or inclusive? What kind of ideology will we allow in the dictionary? What kind of influence will our dictionary have on its target users and on the broader community? What do we offer our speech communities? And how do our dictionaries reflect the actual state in a speech community? We have to choose. Thank you very much.